This is Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Episode 97 of Musical Talk. I'm joined here by Lisa. Hello, Lisa.
Hi, Nick. How are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. You've now, in a couple of weeks' time, in episode 99, you're going to hear Thos Ribbits from Edinburgh, which is quite near you, I believe.
It was not far at all. It's 40 minutes on a train.
And we recently had an episode discussing shows in Edinburgh, and one of those shows was Departure Lounge. Now, you actually, last night, you saw Departure Lounge, didn't you?
I did, yes. I saw it. It's on at George 1 at the Festival Fringe, and I have to say it was absolutely superb. Or is it George 4? I think it's George 4. But we thoroughly enjoyed it. I took my whole family went, my mum, my aunt, and my two cousins, and we went down to see what it was like. It was. I don't think I've laughed so much since I saw Spamalot.
Wow,
it was brilliant. It was absolutely fantastic. It was interesting. We had Nicholas Parsons at the end of our row, who it transpired was featuring the show in his Nicholas Parsons Happy Hour.
Okay.
He does as part of the Edinburgh Comedy. So
yes, he was with Thos last year at Edinburgh. They met up and he came on the podcast. Now you've spent many a summer holiday in Spain, haven't you? So the story could maybe you could relate to the story somehow. Yeah,
I've spent every summer since I was about 2 actually on the Costa del Sol in Spain, and as have my family members who were with me, which probably why we got just so much out of seeing the production, because we've met these 4 lads every summer since I can remember. It's probably the best thing about it is a lot of people going to it will think, oh no, I mean maybe they're not like that. Yes, they're like that. Lads on tour and yeah, it's like that. Full English breakfasts and lots of swearing.
Good.
I love the fact that on the leaflet for it, it says, warning, this show contains language and hand gestures which some of you will hopefully find offensive.
That's brilliant.
Which, for a few moments, I was thinking about my 14 and 16-year-old cousins and going, have I made the right choice by bringing them to this?
They're 14 and 16, they'll probably love it more than you did.
No, they thoroughly enjoyed it. Nothing to do with the fact that the second they clapped eyes on one of the cast, they went, we're sitting in the front row. So
that would have probably been the female member we had on Musical Talk, or was it a male member?
It was a male member that they spotted.
Right.
It was a male member. I will not name and shame because my cousins would probably never forgive me. So.
Well, on the cuff of that, do go and see Departure Lounge once again because it sounds wonderful, and I hope it has.
Definitely go and see it if you can. I mean, yes, there are bits that people might ordinarily find offensive, but within the context of the show, it's just comedic and they're very good. So go and see it. It's worth the money.
Well, it's probably more real life than anything. That's what I don't get about people's. Oh, it's offensive. You know, it uses swear words. Well, so does every person on the planet. You know, it's not as if it's an unheard
Well, exactly. It's swear words and gestures and things that you come across in everyday life, and it's on TV and it's in films, and everybody's seen it before. So, I think saying warning you might find offensive is more of a disclaimer on their behalf so that people don't kind of go, what I expected.
Yes, it's not like a certain film which is a 12 and you bring your 4-year-old kid to it.
No, definitely don't take your kids to Batman.
No. Anyway, that's another episode altogether, but in this episode we have you chatting to someone rather special and someone which has taken a lot of hard work and a lot of time to get on the podcast. And who is that, Lisa?
Yes, this week I was lucky enough to speak to Anthony Rapp, who I'm sure most of our listeners will.
Oh my god!
Yes, the rent heads among you better calm down because you'll be listening to Anthony speaking about his time in Rent, of course, and amongst other things. And he was very interesting to speak to, actually, and particularly his views on his time in London, which I'm sure some of you will find fascinating.
Well, you as a Rent fan, what did you get out of talking to him personally?
It was more interesting for me to hear his opinions, because I've been a fan of Rent for a long time now and have fully formed opinions about it. And a lot of the stuff that he mentioned I hadn't even considered before. There's always this long-standing debate about whether the original Broadway cast recording is better than the movie soundtrack. And he actually, in the interview, puts forward a very good case as to why he prefers the soundtrack version, which I thought was quite interesting. Certainly, I don't think he'll be rushing back to London anytime soon after what some of the critics said. But when I spoke to him, he said that if we could find something that he could be in and fix the weather for him, he'd love to come back to the West End. So if the rent heads can find something for him to be in, then he'll happily come to the West End.
Let's stop hearing what he said and actually start hearing what he said, and I'm going to hand you over to the interview the pair of you did.
You're listening to Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Basically, obviously you were in the original workshop cast of Rent, and Rent is a huge show. What was it like to have that opportunity to create a role like that? Did you have any idea that it would become what it has become now?
It was, at the time, it was something that I was certainly intrigued by and interested in doing and happy to do, and it was coming at a time when I was out of work, so it was a nice, first and foremost, it was just nice to have a job.
Yeah.
I didn't know in any way that it was going to turn into remotely like what it turned into. In terms of creating a role, I mean, it was an honor, but it didn't really, the full impact of what I was a part of didn't really hit me until really we started rehearsal. And then I started to fall in love with it and was thrilled when, after doing the workshop, I was asked back to the off-Broadway production, which then, of course, turned into the Broadway production, which then became, led to everything else that happened.
Yeah.
But it all went back to that 10-performance, 3-week workshop we did in the fall of 1994. But, I mean, I wasn't thinking in terms, even then, of, like, quote-unquote, creating a role. I was just thinking of, doing this piece and trying to make it, as alive as possible, and, collaborating with Michael Greif, the director, and Jonathan Larson, the composer, and Tim Wilde, the musical director, and my fellow actors. And then I started to think in some ways of what it's like to, really create a role that will last.
Yeah, because I suppose people think when it's not just your individual role that's being created, it's the entire production and everything that goes along with that. And
yeah,
it's quite something getting from a workshop to Broadway. That in itself is massive and takes a lot of work, and it must have been quite something to be a part of that, to be able to see it through.
Yeah, I was very, very honored and excited and proud to be asked back, and then to see it become everything it became. And what I've always thought when I look back and think about it is that it, to me, validates not just the piece itself, but the idea that people can come together. And we initially were paid very little money, and the work conditions were less than ideal in some ways, but that we could come together and put all of our best ideas, best talents, best work ethic together and come up with something beautiful.
Yeah. And
that could be rewarded. The fact that could lead to success is deeply validating of the ideals that I aspire to live by as an artist and as a human being.
Rent, obviously, itself on stage, and then of course the film. That was a new opportunity in itself to go back with some of the original cast. What was that like? Did you feel you revisited the role and brought something different to it? And having everyone back together like that, how was it different?
Well, it was really interesting. At least I can't speak for everybody involved. I can speak for myself, but I think that we all would probably say something similar to this, which is it was so in our bones and blood that coming back together, even though it was quite a few years since we had all done it together, it came back so fully and felt very alive to all of us. And I didn't particularly try to do anything necessarily different. I just tried to tell the story. And inevitably, I imagine the people who saw my performance then, I mean, people have told me, I have good friends that, saw me back then and saw the film and said they felt, different layers and different colors and things that had gone deeper. And that wasn't anything that I was consciously trying to do. I was just trying to do it, as fully as possible. So, I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel or anything, but I imagine that there were things that grew or changed or altered somewhat, but it wasn't because I really sought. It wasn't from a conscious effort to do that. In terms of getting to come back into the movie, it's I sort of call it a show business miracle that so many of us were asked, because if you look historically at theater pieces that become films, there are almost never. There's usually no one from the original casting gets to the movie. Sometimes one person, sometimes maybe two, very occasionally three, but to have six.
I know it's really quite impressive. I think that's one of the nicest things actually about the film, though, is that it has that kind of authenticity and credibility about it. I don't know if that's just me, or if it just. I think it to have the original people who worked so hard on it, to then have them in the movie, just. I think it's fitting.
Well, I'm biased, but I think it's fitting too. I was really happy that they did that for us, and we'd all essentially written off the possibility. It felt like it had been too long, and if it was ever going to happen, it was going to be with other people. When they came around to us, it was a big surprise, but a wonderful surprise.
How did you find filming it? Do you think anything was lost changing it into the movie, or?
Well, it's funny because the difference really is just logistics. It's the fact that you're on a soundstage or on a set, and you do the same scene over and over and over again in any given day. So the rhythms of it are different. But in terms of telling the story and singing those songs and being in the moment, all that stuff is very much the same. It's just that. Your day, the way your day is structured is quite different.
Yeah.
And there's cameras there, and but the real core nitty gritty of it is the same, because we're telling the same story and playing the same characters. So doing the movie, I've always thought of doing movies as sort of like going away to summer camp, because just the hours, you especially when you're on location, you go away, you spend all these days and hours and hours and hours with the same people every day working on something. And it's a very, I don't mean isolated like lonely, but it's a very, it's an experience that's very separate from your normal routine, and it's very enveloping. And it was, in that case, it was a wonderfully isolating and enveloping experience, because we were having such a good time doing this piece that we love so much.
Yeah, I suppose that's an added bonus, was that it was with people that you knew well already, and must have been quite good.
And then I became really close with Tracy Toms, who played Joanne, who was new, and Rosario, who played Mimi, who was new, and it was a very lucky situation all the way around.
I mean, the film did very well, and I've got the DVD and the soundtrack, which is very different to the original Broadway cast recording in some respects. Have you ever drawn comparisons between the two recordings?
Yeah, I know that the Broadway cast recording is near and dear to fans' hearts, and we certainly understand and appreciate that. But we, as a cast, were generally a little unhappy with some of the production of the original recording. Feel like it didn't quite rock enough, and we feel like if Jonathan had been alive, he would have insisted on a little more edgy sound in the recording. Heavier drums, heavier guitars, when necessary. And so when we went back in the studio with Rob Cavallo for the movie soundtrack, he's a true rock and roll producer. I mean, he's Green Day and Goo Goo Dolls and all these people, and so we're much happier with the overall sonic experience of the movie soundtrack versus the original cast recording.
I think they're both good in their own rights. Of course, I have a soft spot for the original one, because that's the one that I've had the longest and has been played more times than I care to admit through school and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah.
It's nice to have a fresh look at it along with the film, a fresh soundtrack to go with that. I think it works for the project, and like you said, there's a nice rocky edge, which makes a huge difference.
But then it also has, to me, the film soundtrack is also very successful, and then, the more sort of lyrical, beautiful moments like Will I think is really lovely on the film soundtrack. And, I mean, I honestly haven't listened to the original cast recording in a long, long time. But it's, I just remember when it first came out, the one time it sounded the best was when I was at my friend's house, and she had like a super high-end sound system, and she cranked it. And I sat in the middle of her living room with her incredibly crazy, super high-end sound system, and she cranked super loud, and that's when it sounded good to me.
I know, like, Rent still has a phenomenal fan base and a very faithful fan base. Did the film just introduce a new generation to it and bring them to the stage show? Or it
seems that way. I mean, I don't know the market research demographic stuff, but
yeah,
I've done a lot of traveling around the country. I wrote a book that came out a couple years ago, and I've done a tremendous amount of traveling around the country to talk to students about it and young people, and so I've in my informal, anecdotal experience, yes, the film has introduced a lot of new people to the piece and brought them, and many of them have, in fact, then followed that up with going to see the show.
I've read your book, It's Without You, which, for listeners who haven't read it, is an autobiography. How did you find writing that? It's very personal, a lot of it. Having that out there for everyone to read, did you find that quite difficult to do, or did it come quite easily?
I found it really, really difficult to do it, but not necessarily because of the personal nature of it. In terms of, like, I really wasn't afraid of what people were going to think of whatever personal things I had to share. It was more just the personal nature of it in terms of my own journey through being able to relive those experiences to be able to write about them. I mean, that's what I felt like I had to do. I felt like I had to live through each moment newly, again, to be able to access it, to be able to tell the truth in my writing. And it was all difficult enough to live through the first time. In that sense, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. But also, in many ways, the most rewarding. The response to it has been unbelievably positive in ways that I never would have anticipated.
I know some bits of it I found very, very hard to read, so I can't imagine how hard it must have been for you to go back and relive that, to actually put it into words.
Yeah, it was. I recommend it in some ways because I think catharsis is very important. I mean, that's one of the things the book is about, is catharsis. I think it's about being able to face and go through and live through the most difficult and challenging moments, because that's the only thing you can. That's the only thing you really can do. I mean, or you can't. The alternative is to run away from them. So I mean, I just felt like it was incumbent upon me to tell the truth, to tell the full truth, and live through the full truth. But at the same time, it was very, very cathartic, as I said, and very healing. And now that the book has been in the world for these last couple of years, I feel very free of all that stuff. I mean, it's part of my life, and and it's certainly, obviously, now on the page for as long as the book remains in the world. Even if it goes out of print, people still have copies of the book that they could read. It will live in that sense, but it's like out of me and into the world, and so it feels almost like it's taken flight. And there it is. Okay, bye. See you.
Don't have to worry about it anymore. You can all read it and worry about it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I want to ask, I know you came over to the UK when Rent came over here. Historically, Rent hasn't translated as well to the UK. Do you have an opinion on why that might be, or if there's?
I think there's a couple factors. I mean, there is a very loyal and intense fan base in the UK as well. I know that, but
yeah.
And when we were there, we weren't like a huge hit, but we actually did well. I mean, there was the four of us from the original cast that went over to open the show in London. We were there for 6 months, and I mean, it wasn't a smash, but it did well, and people came, and the thing we kept hearing over and over again for people who would stay after and talk to us, and not just young people, but all sorts of people, was how grateful they were for something like it, because it was unusual to have something like that. But in terms of what I think has challenged its success over there was a very, very divided critical response to the show. I mean, we got some lovely reviews, but then we also had incredibly intense negative reviews, harsh in a way that was kind of unusual given the way that the show was received here.
Yeah.
Even when we opened here, there were a couple of dissenters, but basically people really celebrated and appreciated the piece. But the negative reviews in the UK were extraordinarily negative, and there were a couple critics who went so far as to say something that still, every time I say it, still kind of shocks me and is upsetting and actually baseless anyway. But they said that the best career move Jonathan Larson ever made was to die.
That's horrific.
So it's horrible. And
how can anyone say that? No.
I don't know. It's a good question.
That's absolutely uncalled for.
You know, they were intimating. I mean, I actually think the most cynical part of these reviewers actually believe that the show never would have been a success if he hadn't died, which is ridiculous anyway. Because what does that have to do with 14-year-old kids today discovering a piece? Maybe they'll find out that Jonathan died in the course of discovering a piece, but when they hear the music and fall in love with it or see the show, it's not because Jonathan died that that's happening. That's A. And B, that I think on some level, one or two of those critics might have actually thought that the world is better off without him because he was such an untalented hack to them. Mm-hmm. So, but for them to say that, you know, not that long after he had died, and when his family would read that, I mean, it's just to me unconscionable. But I also think that there's an emotional nature of Rent. It wears its heart on its sleeve, and it is very much itself. And I think that for better or for worse, British critics tend to respond maybe a bit more kindly to American works that are darker or that are edgier or that are, you know, that have a darker picture of the American, quote-unquote, American dream. I mean, British critics have loved Arthur Miller, and they've loved Stephen Sondheim, and they loved Chicago. You know, these are the kinds of American imports that seem to do the best over there with the critics. And Rent is not really like that. There's a sense of joy and, you know, how many times is the word love used in the show, and all these things. And these are things that I particularly find very moving and powerful about it, but then these critics seem to have been like completely turned off by it and call it sentimental and all that stuff. So then those things have hurt its chances over the years in terms of getting the kind of respect and foothold. Although, as I said, I know that there are also quite a few fans of the show who live in the UK, as well as all over the world.
I actually found the show when it was in London. I think in about must have been 99 I saw it, and it was actually I'd been to it was a workshop thing beforehand with some of the cast to do some work on what the show was about, and I went into it knowing nothing about it at all, completely nothing at all, and came out of it in tears clutching the soundtrack. So I mean, I think as a piece it speaks for itself. Have heard different things on why it doesn't work over here. I have difficulty selling the show to people who don't know it. Yeah. I've discovered, and I don't know whether it's just, you know, it's not very British to be quite so open about I don't know.
No, I mean, I think that's honestly part of it,
What did you think of Rent Remixed?
I didn't see it. I heard about it. I had a couple friends who saw it, and they were kind of horrified. But, you know, I'm eager to see other productions in terms, and I don't even mean, because I've seen other people do the show, but I mean like reconceived productions. I'm interested in seeing what different designers come up with and that kind of thing. So, but from all that I heard about that, it seemed kind of wrong-headed to me.
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't hear much good about it myself, so I didn't actually. I didn't go and see it. I couldn't do it. I thought about it.
And you know, and I talked to John and his family about it at the time. I was like, how did this come to pass that all these things happen? They were like, you know, at a certain point in the process, they get so many requests, and they're like, well, we're interested in giving artists the chance to explore the piece, you know, so, you know, you have permission to try things. Yeah. And then before they know it, it's turned into something that's, you know, probably farther from Jonathan's vision than even they would have thought. So
it was certainly intriguing, and it did get a lot of attention here, and I saw the cast singing, I think it was Seasons of Love on something, and they were as a cast they seemed to work really well. I just I don't live in London, so I had to justify going to see something, and I couldn't do it. So how do you feel about Rent closing on Broadway? Do you think it's time?
I don't know. I mean, it's bittersweet. It's on a very selfish level. I get to walk by the theater whenever I'm in that neighborhood, which is fairly often because it's, you know, it's central to my business, and so a lot of times I have meetings or auditions or rehearsals in the neighborhood, and so it's always like a little touchstone. Like I walk by there and I see it, and it's like a home away from home, and I can stop in whenever I want to say hi to my friends who are still there, and, you know, people I've worked with over the years, and so it's just a nice it's a touchstone of my life. And so on that selfish level, I'm sad that I won't have it anymore. On a much bigger level, I'm sad that it's also, I know that's that way, and for many, many people who, when they come to New York, that's one of the things they want to do is revisit that story and at that theater, and it's just filled with ghosts and memories and energy. So it's kind of bittersweet that all that'll be gone, but at the same time, I mean, there's a very exciting moment that's about to happen, which is all these new theater companies and schools and regional theaters are going to get to do the show that have been waiting years to do it. So all these many, many hundreds or thousands of people are going to get to experience the piece from the inside now in a way that they never would have been able to before, and that's really nice. Certainly a mixed bag.
I'm actually going to see it this month, actually.
I know there's some very, very good people in the cast right now. So
yeah, I've heard from people that I know, but you're a very diverse sort of actor. Do you prefer theatre to film and television, or?
Yeah, I prefer theatre. I do. It's more immediate an experience, and I like the rhythms of theatre. But I also have been quite lucky with the quality of work that I've gotten to do on film, and even I haven't done a lot of TV, and the little bit of TV that I've done, it's generally been really good stuff. So when that's the case, and when you're working with great people, that can be also very rewarding. But I think the ideal actor's medium is theatre.
Aside, obviously, from Rent, what have been your favourite things to work on?
I got to do Hedwig a few years ago, and that was incredible. I love that piece, and it's an amazing character, and the way the audience connects to that piece is really special, and so that was a thrill. I got to do Henry V a few years ago also, which then the two roles were essentially within a calendar year of the other, and so just to be able to do that kind of diversity of material is pretty exciting.
That's quite.
I worked on a couple. My brother is a very accomplished and wonderful playwright. Adam Rapp is his name. He actually just played Nocturne at the Almeida, and it's going to the Fringe in Edinburgh this season. I've worked on a couple of his pieces, and I really love working with him, and I hope I get to do that more. I mean, it's not the same medium, but working on my book is really incredible. And now I'm adapting the book into a one-man show, which is something that when I was writing the book, it was never on my mind. Never thought I would.
How's all the preparation going for that?
It's going well. I mean, I did a reading of it last December, and it went really well, and made some revisions and cuts, and now we're going to go back in rehearsal and see how we're doing, and get to really spend more time developing it and getting it in front of an audience for a run. For a series of, however many performances we're going to do, like probably 30 or 40 performances, and you can learn a lot in that time. So,
what's the sort of format that you're using for it?
It's direct narration, telling, it's text is pretty much lifted from the book, but very condensed, incredibly condensed. It's an hour, 20 minutes or so piece, and the book itself is 300 and whatever pages. So, and then I weave in and out of speaking and singing. I use music to help tell the story too. So.
Are you using your own music from
yes.
your album?
Yes, some of my own music, and then some excerpts of songs from Rent. And and there's one new song that's not on my album that I wrote with my guitar player, and we're probably going to write another new song, but we're still trying to figure that out.
That sounds great.
Yeah, thanks.
Would you do another album, or is that something that's too far, sort of?
No, I'd love to. It's mostly a matter of time to get together with my band and get to write stuff. I mean, we all have so many different projects happening all the time, so it's hard to carve out that time. Although now that I'm going to be with David, my guitar player, for such a concentrated period of time, I have a feeling we could come up with a lot of stuff. And we wrote the one new song we wrote for the show when we did the reading in December. We wrote one afternoon. So
that's great. What was the last thing that you saw on stage that had a big impact on you? Really?
Yeah, I mean, I thought August Osage County was really exciting. Really a wonderful mix of incredible ensemble acting. It was very funny, shocking, very entertaining, but also really smart and interesting and honest and crazy. I mean, it was definitely inspiring. And I love Spring Awakening in terms of musical theater. I think it's authentic and heartfelt and rock, very, very moving to me.
The West End's going to be getting both of those in the next year or so. So
cool.
Hopefully some of our listeners will pick them up. I mentioned earlier that you worked over here on Rent. Is there anything that would entice you back to the West End, or are you quite happy?
No, sure, I would love to come there again. I mean, it's hard for us to do that unless it's like a very specific job, a very specific thing that we have this exchange thing we have to do, and
Yeah.
I'm well known in theater circles, but I'm not like famous enough that my name alone could get me guaranteed to have permission to go over there, I think. But yeah, if it's the right show and the right time, I would happily do it. I had a wonderful time living there. I mean, it sounds like a cliche. It's just the truth that summer, I was there during the summer from March to October, and the weather was particularly bad, and it did wear me out. I mean, there was a point where I was like, if I have one more day of like low-lying cloud cover and drizzle and chill, I mean, it was just weeks and weeks and weeks of that, and that got to be a little oppressive after a while. But other than that, I had a really wonderful time.
Oh, believe me, I can sympathize with that.
No, I know. I mean,
there comes a point where you're like, is the sun ever going to shine?
Yeah. And then when it did, which it did a couple times, it was glorious. I mean, and the whole city just
comes alive.
I mean, transformed.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
That was very cool to see. But boy, in the meantime, forget about it.
So, basically, if we want you to come back over, we have to find something that we can get you in and arrange the weather.
Yeah, see,
Right.
exactly.
Okay, listeners, there's your challenge.
I know, right?
Is there anything that you, aside obviously from like the weather and stuff, was there anything in particular that you really enjoyed about being in London or Britain, or anything that you wish that you could have done while you were here that you didn't get a chance to? Or
I actually was lucky enough to have nice opportunities to travel around the country a little bit. I mean, with one day off a week, it's kind of tough, but
yeah.
I got to go to Bath, I got to go to St. Ives, I got to go to Brighton. I mean, but there is certainly, I mean, I didn't get to go everywhere in the country.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I love cities. I love living, I live in New York. I love living in a city, and London is just a wonderful, world-class city. I felt very comfortable there in terms of I felt like I was living there, and that was nice.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I was an outsider so much. And the cast, the British members of the cast were so fantastic, and we became good friends. And there was something that I did in London too that for some reason, well, I mean, London bookstores are incredible, and I just read more in London than I had read in a long time. It was just, I felt so drawn to the world of literature and language and books, and even sitting in a park and reading. It's not something I generally do in the city, because I'm usually running around in New York City, because I'm usually running around so much. But because my life was a little simpler there, I was able to enjoy sort of the quieter things of living in a city more when I was in London.
It's quite nice to have that opportunity to kind of to pause and take breath from time to time.
Yeah, and I think London's parks, and it's a wonderfully designed city, I think, in many ways. And did my best to take advantage of those aspects of it. It's also so ridiculously expensive, but that's another matter.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. I really don't understand how people live there, because from what I gather, wages are not commensurately
to a degree
structured.
To a degree they are. I visit London and I go about 4 to 6 times a year. Believe me, my bank account knows about it.
Yes.
It's not a cheap city to visit. It really isn't. And I've entertained the idea of living there so many times, and then I'm like, no, I can't afford it. I'd need 2 jobs.
People do it and they manage,
You're one of our most requested interviewees, so we were just really, really glad to get the opportunity to talk to you, and obviously about Rent and everything, because it, as you said, it does have a big fan base here, and so
I appreciate that. Thank you.
No,
thanks for keeping it alive over there.
We certainly will, with or without the help of Rent Remix.
Yes.
I'm so biased. I shouldn't do that. Yeah. Thank you again. I hope the one-man show all goes really well.
Thank you. I mean, hopefully this will be just the beginning of a long life with the piece, that I can sort of trot it out and do it whenever I get the opportunity. Because just be nice. I mean, it's a story that I really believe in, and if people respond to it as a theatrical piece, it'd be nice to be able to have that sort of just go, okay, I think I'm going to go tell the story in Chicago, or maybe I could come to London with it. Who knows? But,
yeah.
I mean, that would be certainly lovely, but I'd certainly love to try to do a run of it here in New York, too.
I think a lot of people would probably enjoy that, actually, the opportunity to hear it firsthand.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe on Saturday, and I hadn't realised that your brother had a play, so I'm going to go look it up now.
Yeah, it's called Nocturne, It's very, very intense, sad piece, but it's beautifully written. And apparently, he went over to London to see it, and he was quite happy with the production. So,
Great.
Yeah, I recommend.
Well, thank you again, and I'll let you go on and enjoy your day.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Take care.
Visits to you are suddenly new, and suddenly everything's sacred. I've been here before, will I be here again? Please tell me you'll never be taken. Is this another time? Or is this the last time? How much more time? When will time take away my visits to you? Living with this, holding your hand, knowing I'll have to let go soon. Living right now and right now and right now, knowing I'll soon be without you. Is this another time? Or is this the last time? How much more time? When will time take away my visits? And when you go where you're going, where will you be going? I know I'll keep going on my visits to Is this another time? Or is this the last time? How much more time? When will time take away my visits? Is this another time? Or is this the last time? How much more time? When will time take away? When will time take away? When will time take away my visits to you?
And closing the interview there was Visits to You, performed by Anthony Rapp. Lisa, what a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it was great, and it gave me another chance to go back and actually look through stuff that I'd forgotten or neglected, like Anthony's album Look Around, which you can find on Amazon.co.uk and various other sellers. It was really interesting, and I'd forgotten a lot of the stuff about Rent, things that I hadn't thought about for some time, that came back to me to talk while I was talking to him. Although there's the odd moment when you're speaking to him, which is a little strange, but certainly when it comes to knowing about Rent, I don't think you'll find anyone who's more knowledgeable about the piece and all the emotion that goes into it than him.
Okay.
Certainly not me by an absolute long shot.
Well, speaking of this, next week we're going to be talking to you all about your Broadway trip.
Yes, I'm seeing Rent on Broadway before it closes, which I'm very excited about because I was worried. Initially the closure notices were posted for June, and of course when the ticket sales went through the roof they extended that to September. So
yes, so more Rent from you next week, as it sounds like it could be.
I'll try not to go on about it overly much.
Please, I mean, so you're going to Broadway soon. You must be hugely looking forward to that trip.
Oh, very much. I'm trying to find out as many ways to get into all the different theatres as I can. I don't think I'm going to get to see everything that I want to while I'm there. There's just not enough days. Mm-hmm. But hopefully I'll get to catch a few musicals and be able to report back on them. Obviously quite a few of them are on over here as well, so it's trying to see the ones that aren't over here or aren't transferring very shortly, as several seem to be at the moment. We've got Spring Awakening and Legally Blonde coming up in the next year or two. So it's seeing the ones on Broadway that are going to be on Broadway for a while before they come.
And we are looking forward to your discussion about that hugely. And I
apologise now for the jet lag.
It's all right. I hope your trip goes very, very well.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations on your interview with Anthony Rapp.
Thank you. It was worth the wait.
And thank you very much for listening. Lisa, congratulations. You didn't mention...
This has been a production of Musical Talk, copyright 2008. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at feedback@musicaltalk.co.uk. Thanks for listening.